My name is Michael Harris. Once, that name carried honor. I was a soldier, a husband, and a homeowner. I had a life that meant something. Today, people walk past me without a second glance, their eyes sliding away as if I don't exist. To them, I'm just another homeless man sitting on a corner. But behind this weathered face, behind these torn clothes, lies a story they don't know. A story of sacrifice, betrayal, and loss. I grew up in a small town in Kentucky, raised by parents who believed in hard work and loyalty. My father worked the coal mines, his hands always blackened, his back bent from years underground. My mother worked in a diner, pouring coffee for truckers and farmers, saving every penny she could. They didn't have much, but they gave me two things no money could buy: discipline and pride. From a young age, I wanted to serve. Maybe it was my father's stories of his own time in uniform. Maybe it was the flag that flew outside our school. Maybe it was just the belief that I owed something to this country that had given me a chance. Whatever it was, the day I signed up for the Army, I felt like I was stepping into the shoes I was born to fill. Training was brutal, but I embraced it. The long runs, the push-ups, the nights sleeping in mud. It all hardened me, shaped me into something stronger. When they handed me my uniform, I wore it with pride. I wasn't just Michael Harris anymore. I was Private Harris. Later, Sergeant Harris. I was part of something bigger than myself, but even soldiers need something to come home to, and for me, that was Emily. I met her at a 4th of July picnic, fireworks exploding overhead while she laughed with her friends. She had this energy about her, bright, lively, the kind of presence that pulled you in. I introduced myself awkwardly, my confidence on the battlefield suddenly useless. She smiled, teased me about being too serious for such a young guy, and before I knew it, we were talking for hours. Emily became my anchor. She believed in me, supported me, wrote letters when I was away. When I asked her to marry me on the courthouse steps, she said yes with tears in her eyes. We didn't have much money, but together we bought a modest little house, a 2-bedroom place with peeling paint and a sagging porch. To most, it was nothing. To us, it was everything. Our home. I remember planting a flag in the front yard, proud that I could provide something solid for my wife. We painted the walls ourselves, laughed when the colors didn't match perfectly. She filled the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread, the living room with secondhand furniture, the bedroom with warmth. Every corner of that house held a piece of us. When I left for my first deployment, it was Emily who hugged me tight on the porch, whispering, "Come back to me." I promised I would. I promised that no matter what happened overseas, I'd return to her, to our home, to the life we were building. That promise carried me through the long nights in desert camps, through the noise of gunfire and the silence of loss. Whenever the world grew too heavy, I pictured Emily waiting for me on that porch, her hair catching the sunlight, her smile brighter than anything I'd ever seen. For years, that promise was enough. I survived deployments, injuries, and the endless grind of war because I knew what was waiting at home. But promises are fragile things. I sit here now on a cold sidewalk, telling you this story because that house is gone. Emily is gone, and the life I thought I was fighting to protect slipped through my fingers while I was thousands of miles away. I never thought betrayal could hurt more than bullets, but it does. When you give your country your blood, your sweat, your very soul, you expect your home to be there when you return. You expect loyalty. You expect love. Instead, I came back from war to find the home we built sold behind my back. The woman I trusted, my wife, had traded our life for money and left me with nothing. That's how Michael Harris, soldier and husband, became Michael Harris, the homeless man on the corner. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you have to understand what came before it. The life I fought so hard to build, the sacrifices I made, the war that took me away from it all. This is my story, and it begins long before the day I lost everything. Before the uniform, before the desert sun and the sound of gunfire, my life was simple. Not easy, but simple. I was Michael Harris, husband, neighbor, homeowner. My world was built on modest dreams: a steady job, a roof over our heads, a family to raise. Looking back now, those days feel like a different lifetime. like I'm remembering someone else's story. Our house sat on the edge of town, just off a quiet street lined with maple trees. The paint peeled on the shutters, the porch sagged a little, and the roof always seemed to need patching. But it was ours. I remember the day we signed the papers, Emily's hand squeezing mine so tightly I thought she might cut off the circulation. "It's not much," I said. She looked at me with those bright eyes and replied, "It's everything." We poured ourselves into that house. On weekends, I fixed what I could, hammering nails, painting walls, sanding floors. Emily made it a home. She filled the shelves with thrift store books, sewed curtains out of fabric she found at yard sales, planted flowers along the porch that never quite bloomed, but made her smile anyway. Every room carried her touch. Our life was humble, but we were happy. I worked long hours at the auto shop, coming home with grease on my hands and exhaustion in my bones. Emily worked part-time at the library, her love of books spilling over into conversations at the dinner table. We didn't have fine china or expensive vacations, but we had each other. Evenings were spent cooking together, laughing at old sitcoms, dreaming about the future. Children were always part of that dream. Emily would talk about baby names, about painting the spare room yellow, about building a swing set in the yard. I wanted it too, but I told her we needed stability first. More savings, fewer debts. "One day," I'd say, kissing her forehead. "One day soon." It wasn't perfect, of course. Money was always tight. Bills piled up and there were arguments about spending. Sometimes I resented the long hours at the shop, the never-ending repairs on the house, the weight of responsibility pressing down on my shoulders. But even in those moments when tempers flared and doors slammed, Emily and I always found our way back. Love carried us through. The town itself was small enough that everyone knew each other. Neighbors waved when we passed, borrowed tools, brought pies during holidays. There was comfort in that familiarity, in the sense that we belonged to a community. On Sundays, we sat in church pews, hands clasped, listening to hymns that reminded us of simpler truths: faith, loyalty, sacrifice. That was the life I knew before the war, steady, ordinary, filled with little joys and quiet struggles. I didn't crave riches or fame. I craved security. And for a while I thought I had it. Then the letters started coming. Official envelopes stamped with the seal of the Army. At first they were just notices, updates, reminders of the commitment I had made when I enlisted years earlier. But then came the call, the one that said my unit was being deployed overseas. I remember the night I told Emily. We were sitting at the kitchen table, a half-eaten dinner between us. She was talking about repainting the living room when I slid the letter across the table. She read it slowly, her face paling with each line. When she looked up at me, her eyes were wet with tears. "How long?" she whispered. "Could be a year," I said. My voice felt like it belonged to someone else. She shook her head. "Michael, we just got settled. We just started building this life. How can you leave now?" I reached for her hand, but she pulled away. The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Finally, I said, "I have to go. It's my duty." Emily stood, pacing the kitchen, her arms wrapped around herself. "Duty," she repeated bitterly. "What about your duty to me? To us?" I didn't know how to answer. I had promised her a life, but I had also promised my country my service. Both promises felt unbreakable, yet they pulled me in opposite directions. That night we lay in bed back to back, the space between us wider than the ocean I would soon cross. I wanted to reach out, to tell her it would be okay, but the words lodged in my throat. The days that followed were a blur of preparation. I spent hours at the base training, filling out paperwork, getting vaccinations. Emily tried to stay strong, cooking my favorite meals, folding my clothes neatly into my duffel bag. But I saw the cracks, her red-rimmed eyes, the way her hands trembled when she thought I wasn't looking. On the morning I left, she stood on the porch in her robe, clutching a mug of coffee like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I kissed her, trying to memorize the feel of her lips, the warmth of her skin. "I'll come back," I promised. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You'd better," she whispered. As the bus pulled away, I pressed my hand to the window, watching her shrink into the distance. The house stood behind her, paint peeling, porch sagging, but it was ours. It was home. I held on to that image like a lifeline, never imagining that when I returned, it would all be gone. The day my orders became real, it felt like the ground shifted beneath me. Up until then, the military had been a part of my identity, but it was distant. Drills, training weekends, the occasional assignment that disrupted life but never completely changed it. This time was different. This time they were sending me into a war zone. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the envelope for a long time before opening it. The weight of it felt heavier than paper. Emily sat across from me, folding laundry, humming softly to herself. I didn't want to break the moment, didn't want to break her, but eventually I tore the seal and read the words that changed everything. Deployment orders, immediate preparation required. The first thing I did was look at Emily. She saw it in my face before I spoke. The color drained from her cheeks and the hum died in her throat. "It's happening, isn't it?" she asked. I nodded. "They need me overseas. It could be a year, maybe longer." Her hands stilled on the laundry. For a moment she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then she pushed the basket aside and stood, pacing the kitchen like a caged bird. "Michael, we just started this life. The house, the plans. You can't just leave it all." "It's not a choice," I said quietly. "It's my duty." I swore an oath. She stopped pacing and turned on me, tears brimming in her eyes. "What about the oath you swore to me? For better or worse, in sickness and health. Does that mean nothing?" Her words cut deep because she was right. I had made two promises, one to my country, one to my wife, and now they were colliding in the cruelest way. We fought that night, voices rising, words sharp enough to wound. Emily accused me of caring more about the Army than our marriage. I accused her of not understanding what service meant. Neither of us truly listened. By the time we went to bed, the silence between us was louder than the argument had been. The following days were a blur of preparation. I reported to the base for briefings, medical checks, equipment distribution. At home, I tried to tie up loose ends, bills, repairs, chores. Emily moved like a shadow through the house, quieter than usual, her smile forced when neighbors stopped by to wish us well. One evening, I found her sitting on the porch, staring at the flag we had planted in the yard. "I hate this," she whispered as I sat beside her. "I hate that I can't stop you from going." I took her hand, rough from gardening, warm in mine. "I don't want to leave you," I said, "but this is what I have to do. I'll come back. I promise." She didn't answer. She just leaned against me, silent tears wetting my shirt. When the day of departure came, the base was swarming with families. Wives clutching husbands, children clinging to fathers, parents trying to hold back tears. The air was thick with the scent of diesel fuel, the hum of buses idling, the crackle of announcements over loudspeakers. Emily stood with me in the crowd, her hand gripping mine so tightly my knuckles ached. She tried to smile, but her lips trembled. "Write to me," she said, "every chance you get." "I will," I promised. "And when I come back, we'll finish painting the living room. Remember? You wanted it yellow." That made her laugh, a short, broken sound, but it was enough. I kissed her one last time, memorizing the feel of her lips, the taste of salt from her tears. Then the call came, and I had to board the bus. I pressed my hand to the window as it pulled away, watching Emily grow smaller, her figure blurring through glass and distance. She raised her hand in return, holding it there until I could no longer see her. Behind her, the little house stood quiet and proud, the flag waving in the breeze. That image, my wife on the porch, our home behind her, the flag overhead, seared itself into my memory. I carried it with me across the ocean, through deserts and danger, through sleepless nights and endless days. It became my lifeline, the promise of what waited on the other side of duty. I didn't know then how fragile that promise really was. I thought the war would test me. I thought the hardest battles would be fought with bullets and sandstorms, with fear and exhaustion. But the real battle was waiting back home, in the very place I thought I was protecting. And it was a battle I never saw coming. War changes everything. It changes how you think, how you sleep, how you measure time. Out there, days weren't counted in hours but in missions. Nights weren't for rest, but for survival. Every sound, every shadow could be the difference between coming home and never leaving the desert. When I first arrived overseas, the heat hit me like a wall. The desert stretched endlessly, the air shimmering, sand clinging to everything, skin, clothes, even food. We slept in tents, boots always laced, rifles always within arm's reach. Training had prepared me for the physical demands, but nothing prepared me for the constant tension, the way your body stayed wound tight like a spring that never relaxed. Our missions varied. Sometimes we escorted supply convoys through dangerous routes, scanning every roadside for hidden explosives. Sometimes we patrolled villages, trying to build trust while knowing any smile could mask hostility. And sometimes we were simply there to endure, long hours under the burning sun, waiting, watching, listening. The danger was everywhere. One wrong step, one overlooked detail, and it could all be over. We lost men, good men. The kind of men you joked with over rations one day and saluted in silence the next. I learned to keep my grief quiet, to fold it deep inside and keep moving. There was no time for mourning. In war, hesitation could kill you. Letters from home became my lifeline. Emily wrote often at first, pages filled with little details of life back home. She told me about the flowers blooming in the yard, about the neighbor's new dog, about the book she was reading at the library. She described our house with such warmth that I could almost feel myself back there, sitting on our porch as the sun set. I read those letters until the paper grew soft, until the ink smudged from my hands. When the days grew long and the fear pressed in, I pulled them out and reminded myself why I was there. I wasn't just fighting for a flag or for orders shouted by officers. I was fighting for Emily, for the life we had built, for the home that waited for me. But over time, her letters changed. They grew shorter, less frequent. She still wrote about the house, about chores and bills, but the warmth faded. She sounded tired, lonely. Once she wrote, "It feels like I'm living in this house alone, Michael. Like it's mine, not ours anymore." Those words gnawed at me. I told myself it was just the distance, just the strain of separation. I wrote back, promising that I would return soon, that everything we dreamed of was still within reach. I poured myself into those letters, though I never knew if my words reached her the way hers reached me. The nights were the worst. We slept in shifts, always half alert, the sound of distant gunfire or the thud of mortars never far. I would lie on my cot, staring at the canvas ceiling of the tent, clutching Emily's letters, replaying her voice in my head. Sometimes I dreamed of her, vivid and real, her laughter ringing in my ears. Waking up was like losing her all over again. I wasn't the only one struggling. My brothers in arms carried their own burdens. Widows, children, parents waiting at home. Around the fire at night, when the desert grew quiet, we shared pieces of ourselves. One man talked about missing his daughter's first steps. Another admitted he was terrified his wife wouldn't wait for him. We nodded, understanding. In war, the enemy wasn't just out there. Sometimes it was the fear inside us. That home was slipping away while we fought to protect it. There were moments of pride, too. Times when we completed a mission safely, when a convoy rolled into base intact, when we saved lives instead of losing them. I carried those victories with me, small but powerful reminders that our sacrifice meant something. But the victories never lasted long. Another mission always loomed, another risk, another chance to fall. Through it all, I held onto the vision of home. I pictured Emily standing on the porch, her hand raised in a wave. I pictured the little house, flawed but ours, the flag fluttering in the yard. That vision kept me moving, step after step, through the dust in the danger. But what I didn't know, what none of us ever know, is that sometimes the battle you think you're fighting isn't the one that matters most. I thought I was fighting for safety, for honor, for my country. In truth, the real fight was happening thousands of miles away, in the very place I thought was waiting for me. And by the time I returned, I would learn that not all wounds come from war. Some come from betrayal, and those are the wounds that never heal. Out in the desert, surrounded by dust and danger, home became more than a place. It became a dream, a sanctuary my mind built brick by brick whenever the world grew too heavy. Every soldier has something they hold on to, a child's drawing, a photograph, a lucky coin. For me, it was the image of Emily in our little house back in Kentucky. That vision kept me alive. During long patrols, when the heat pressed down like a weight and my legs ached with every step, I thought about Emily on the porch. I pictured her leaning against the railing, a book in her hands, her hair catching the afternoon light. I imagined the smell of her bread drifting from the kitchen, the sound of her laughter filling the living room. That house was small, imperfect, but in my mind it became a palace, an anchor pulling me through the chaos. At night, when the desert finally cooled and the stars blanketed the sky, I lay on my cot and closed my eyes. The sounds of war were never far, distant gunfire, the low hum of generators, the restless shifting of men trying to sleep. But I drowned it out with the memory of home. I pictured myself walking up our cracked driveway, setting down my duffel bag, and feeling Emily's arms around me. Sometimes the vision was so clear I could almost hear her whisper, "Welcome home, Michael." The letters helped, even when they grew shorter, even when her words carried hints of weariness. I clung to them. I read and reread them until the paper softened and the ink faded. She told me about mowing the lawn, about fixing the leaky faucet, about how the neighbor's dog barked all night. Ordinary details, mundane to anyone else. But to me, they were lifelines. They reminded me that the world I was fighting for still existed, that it was waiting for me. I wrote back every chance I got, though mail was slow and uncertain. I told her about the desert sunsets, about the camaraderie of the men, about the pride I felt wearing the uniform. I left out the worst parts, the explosions, the casualties, the fear that gnawed at us daily. I didn't want her to picture me in danger. I wanted her to picture me coming home, whole and safe. Still, doubts crept in. Sometimes weeks passed without a letter. I told myself it was just the mail system, just delays. But deep down, I felt a shift. Her words lacked the warmth they once carried. She signed her letters with "Love, Emily," but I wondered if the love was fading. Loneliness does strange things to people, both to those who leave and to those who wait. Around the fire at night, other soldiers shared similar fears. One confessed his wife had stopped answering his calls. Another admitted his girlfriend wrote less and less. We nodded silently, each of us carrying the same worry. That war wasn't just taking our time, but also stealing the people we loved. For me, the fear of losing Emily was worse than the fear of losing my life. Bullets and bombs were dangers I could face head on. Betrayal, distance, indifference. Those were battles I didn't know how to fight. And yet, every time I closed my eyes, I returned to that house. I saw us repainting the living room yellow like she'd always wanted. I saw us planting flowers in the yard, watching them bloom together. I saw us raising children, filling the spare room with toys and laughter. Those dreams weren't just hopes. They were my armor against despair. One evening, after a particularly brutal mission, I sat alone and pulled out the photograph I always kept in my pocket. It was of Emily and me on our porch, taken the day we bought the house. She was laughing, her hair messy from painting, a streak of yellow on her cheek. My arm was around her, and for the first time in my life, I had looked at the camera and thought, "This is happiness." Staring at that photo, I whispered, "I'll be back, Emily. Hold on. Just hold on." I didn't know then that while I dreamed of coming home, home itself was slipping away, that the house I pictured every night would no longer be ours, that the woman I loved, the one I believed was waiting faithfully, was making choices that would shatter me more than any war ever could. But in that moment, I believed. I believed in love, in loyalty, in the promise of home. That belief carried me through firefights and sleepless nights, through fear and exhaustion. It kept me alive when so many others didn't make it. Dreaming of home was my salvation, and it would become my greatest heartbreak. The day they told us we were finally going home, the camp erupted with cheers. Men clapped each other on the back, some cried openly, some just sat in silence, too stunned to believe it. For months, maybe years, we had lived in constant tension. measuring time and missions and counting down the days in our heads. Now the countdown had reached zero. We were going home. For me, the word home meant one thing, Emily. I packed my gear quickly, heart pounding with anticipation. My uniform was worn, my boots scuffed, my face lined with exhaustion, but none of that mattered. I imagined her running into my arms at the airport, imagined the smell of her hair, the warmth of her embrace. I pictured us walking through the door of our little house, her hand in mine, laughter filling the rooms again. The journey back felt endless. Planes, buses, waiting in lines. Each mile closer, my chest tightened with a mix of joy and fear. What if she had changed? What if we had grown apart? But I pushed those thoughts down. Love, I told myself, was stronger than time, stronger than distance. When the plane touched down on American soil, I kissed the ground. Literally, some laughed, some did the same, some simply stood in silence, overwhelmed. I boarded the bus that would take us to our families, my heart hammering like it had before my first battle. The reunion hall was chaos, banners, flags, children holding signs that read, "Welcome home, Daddy." Wives and girlfriends screamed names, rushing forward, throwing themselves into embraces. I scanned the crowd desperately, searching for Emily's face, but she wasn't there. At first, I told myself she was late, traffic maybe, or maybe she wanted to surprise me at home. I stood there as soldiers reunited, the crowd thinning until only a few of us were left. Still no Emily. The pit in my stomach grew heavy. Finally, I grabbed my bag and caught a ride with an old buddy. He lived a few towns over but dropped me near my street. I walked the last stretch, my boots dragging on the familiar pavement, nerves twisting in my gut. When I turned the corner and saw our house, my breath caught. Something was wrong. The paint was different, the porch had been repaired. The flag was gone. I stood frozen, staring. The house looked like ours, but not ours. It was like seeing a stranger wearing your clothes. A car pulled into the driveway. A man stepped out, holding the hand of a little girl. He looked at me briefly, confused, and said, "Can I help you?" I stammered, This is my house." He shook his head. "Sorry, buddy, bought this place 6 months ago. Maybe you've got the wrong address." My chest went cold. My legs felt weak. 6 months? Bought? I stumbled back onto the sidewalk, clutching my duffel bag like it was the only thing anchoring me to the earth. Emily. Where was Emily? I ran to the neighbor's house, Mrs. Collins, the old woman who used to bring us pies. She answered the door, her face lighting up in recognition, then clouding with pity. "Michael," she whispered. "Oh, Michael, I thought you knew." "Knew what?" My voice cracked. She hesitated, then sighed. "Emily sold the house while you were overseas, said she couldn't manage alone. She left, moved to the city with someone else, the words hit harder than any mortar blast I had endured. Sold the house. Left. With someone else. I staggered back, shaking my head. No, that can't be true. She wrote me. She said she was waiting." Mrs. Collins's eyes softened. "I'm so sorry, dear. She didn't tell you?" I turned away before she could say more. My feet carried me aimlessly down the street, past yards where children played, past houses that still had flags waving proudly. The world blurred through tears I couldn't stop. I had fought a war believing I had something to come home to. I had risked my life, carried scars inside and out, for a dream that no longer existed. Emily was gone. The house was gone. Everything I had fought for had been ripped away, not by the enemy overseas, but by betrayal at home. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on a bench near the park where Emily and I had once walked, clutching my bag, staring into the dark. My mind replayed every letter, every promise, every dream. All lies now, all ash. Coming home was supposed to be my victory. Instead, it was the beginning of my greatest defeat. I always imagined the hardest moment of my life would come on the battlefield. A bullet tearing through the air, a comrade bleeding out beside me, an explosion ripping apart the ground beneath my feet. But nothing, not war, not death, not fear, prepared me for the sight of strangers living in the house I had fought to protect. I stood on the sidewalk that day, staring at my old home, my legs shaking as if I'd marched 100 miles. The porch where Emily and I had once shared coffee in the mornings now held potted plants that weren't hers. The curtains in the window were new, hiding lives I didn't know. The flagpole in the yard was bare. Even the flowers she had planted along the porch, those stubborn little blooms that never quite grew, were gone. It was as though the life I had built had been erased, painted over by someone else's story. My mind screamed for explanations. Maybe Emily had been forced to sell. Maybe she had left a note. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. I clung to these hopes like a drowning man clings to driftwood, desperate to believe there was some reason other than betrayal. But deep down, I knew. I knew the moment I saw the man in the driveway, his daughter clinging to his hand. I knew when he said, "Bought this place 6 months ago." I knew when Mrs. Collins, kind old Mrs. Collins, looked at me with pity and said Emily had left. Shock is a strange thing. It doesn't just paralyze you, it hollows you out. My body moved without thought. Wandering streets I had walked 1,000 times but now felt foreign. Neighbors' faces blurred as they waved awkwardly, unsure of what to say. Some pretended not to notice me at all. I was the soldier returned from war, yes, but I was also the man who had been left behind. I ended up at the diner Emily used to love. We'd sat in that booth near the window countless times, sharing pancakes on Sunday mornings. Now, as I slid into the seat, the waitress gave me a startled look. "Michael Harris?" she asked softly. I nodded, throat too tight to speak. She poured me coffee, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. She didn't say for what. She didn't need to. Everyone in town knew. Emily hadn't been quiet about it. She had told people she couldn't live alone, that the house was too much, that she deserved more than waiting for a man who might never come home. Hearing it confirmed by whispers, by sympathetic eyes, was worse than hearing it from Emily herself. I stirred sugar into the coffee with shaking hands, staring at the steam, wondering how everything had unraveled so quickly. When I finally left the diner, I walked past the pawn shop. In the window, I saw something that froze me in place. The old clock that had hung in our living room, the one Emily's father had given us as a wedding gift. She had sold it. My stomach twisted. If she sold that, what else had she pawned away? What memories, what promises, what pieces of us had been turned into cash while I was overseas fighting a war? I should have been angry. Fury should have burned through me, enough to drown the pain. But all I felt was numbness. Anger requires energy, and I had none left. The war had drained me, and Emily's betrayal had finished the job. That night, I wandered back to the park bench where I'd sat the night before. I set down my duffel bag, leaned back against the cold wood, and tried to process it all. My wife had sold our house. She had walked away from everything we'd built. And she had done it while I was thousands of miles away, fighting for a country that promised to honor sacrifice but couldn't protect me from betrayal. Sleep didn't come. My mind spun in endless circles, replaying memories of Emily's laughter, her promises, her letters. I heard her voice in my head saying, "Come back to me," and realized those words meant nothing now. She hadn't wanted me back. She had wanted out. By dawn, I was hollow. I sat there watching the sun rise over a town that no longer felt like mine. Soldiers talk about shock after battle, the ringing in your ears, the tunnel vision, the surreal sense that none of it is real. That's what I felt, except this wasn't war. This was home. And somehow it hurt worse. Because in war, you expect the enemy to hurt you. At home, you expect love to protect you. But when love itself betrays you, there's no armor strong enough to keep you standing. I couldn't live on questions forever. I needed to hear it from her lips, no matter how much it broke me. The war had taught me that silence kills more than bullets, and Emily's silence was killing me faster than any wound. So I went looking for her. It wasn't hard. Small towns have a way of keeping secrets only until someone asks the right question. A neighbor muttered about her moving to the city. The waitress at the diner mentioned a new apartment on 5th Street. Before long, I was standing outside a brick building that smelled of stale smoke and fresh paint, clutching the strap of my duffel bag, heart pounding harder than it ever had in combat. I knocked. The door opened slowly, and there she was, Emily. For a moment, time folded. She looked the same soft hair, the same eyes I had memorized under desert stars. But there was something different too, something harder around the edges. And behind her, in the apartment, I glimpsed another man's jacket hanging on a chair. "Michael," she whispered, shock spreading across her face. "Emily," I croaked. My voice was rough, torn from months of shouting orders in silence. "I came home, to our house, but it wasn't ours anymore." She looked down, avoiding my eyes. "I didn't know how else to tell you." "You could have written," I said, anger breaking through the numbness. "You could have told me in one of your letters. Instead, I dreamed of home every night, dreamed of you waiting for me. And all the while you were selling everything we built." Her lips trembled. "Michael, you don't understand. It was too much. The house, the bills, the loneliness. I was drowning." "I was drowning too," I snapped. "Out there in the desert, fighting to stay alive, fighting for us. I thought that's what I was protecting. Our home, our future. And you," my voice broke, "you gave it away." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't deny it. She stepped back, leaning against the door frame as if the weight of my words pressed her down. "I was alone," she whispered. "I needed someone, and he was there." The sentence sliced deeper than shrapnel. "So you replaced me." She shook her head quickly, desperate. "It wasn't like that. I didn't plan it. It just happened." I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh in my throat. "Didn't plan it? Emily, we planned everything. Painting the living room, raising children, growing old together. I fought for those plans, and you let them go like they were nothing." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Behind her, footsteps sounded in the apartment. A man's voice called, "Who is it?" Emily flinched, then turned back to me. "You should go," she said softly. That was the moment I knew it was over. The war hadn't taken my marriage. Betrayal had. I had survived bullets, explosions, endless nights of fear. But this was the wound that would never heal. I stepped back, my duffel bag heavy on my shoulder. "Goodbye, Emily," I said, my voice hollow. "I hope selling our house was worth the price." Her tears fell then, silent rivers down her face. But she didn't stop me. She didn't reach for me. She let me walk away. The streets blurred as I stumbled through them, anger and grief twisting inside me until I thought I might collapse. I ended up at the park again, the same bench where I had sat when I first learned the truth. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the grass. Families laughed in the distance, children played, couples held hands. Life went on, indifferent to my collapse. I buried my face in my hands and let the tear soak come. Months of holding it together on the battlefield, of swallowing fear and pain, all spilled out in heaving gasps. I wasn't Sergeant Harris anymore. I wasn't even Michael Harris, the husband. I was just a broken man with nowhere left to go. When the tears finally stopped, I sat in silence, staring at the horizon. The war had taken pieces of me, but Emily had taken the rest. She had taken my home, my trust, my future. All I had left was my story. And even then, I wondered if anyone would care to hear it. When I walked away from Emily's apartment, I carried nothing but the clothes on my back and the weight of betrayal pressing down on me like armor I couldn't take off. My duffel bag dug into my shoulder, heavier with every step, though inside it was mostly empty now, just uniforms, a few letters, and a photo of us that felt more like a cruel reminder than a comfort. I thought war had already taught me what it meant to lose. I'd seen men vanish in an instant, seen friends carried away under flags, seen hope drain from eyes that once sparkled with laughter. But nothing compared to this, losing not to an enemy's bullet, but to the choice of the person I trusted most. The first few days after the confrontation, I wandered the town aimlessly, caught between denial and despair. I went back to our old street, stood across from the house that was no longer mine, and watched the new family living a life I had once dreamed for myself. The little girl in the yard giggled as she ran through a sprinkler, her father chasing after her. The scene should have been mine. Emily and me with our own children filling that yard with joy. Instead, I was just a shadow standing in the street, invisible and unwanted. I tried finding Emily again, thinking maybe she'd change her mind. Maybe she'd realize what she'd thrown away. But every time I thought of knocking on her door, I remembered the man's voice calling from inside her apartment. She had chosen her path, and I was not part of it. Soon my savings, what little I had left, ran dry. The Army had discharged me with a small check, but lawyers' fees and debts from before deployment ate through it fast. Without a house, without family, I had nowhere to go. Motels became too expensive, meals too rare. I sold my watch, then my phone, then even my father's pocket knife, which I had carried since boyhood. Each loss cut deeper, not for the value, but for the meaning. When the money was gone, I turned to shelters, but shelters filled quickly, and beds were scarce. Some nights I got lucky, sleeping on a thin cot in a crowded room, the air heavy with sweat and exhaustion. Other nights, I curled on benches, pulling my jacket tight against the cold, staring at the stars as if they might offer answers. That was when I truly understood the word homeless. It wasn't just about lacking walls or a roof, it was about losing your place in the world. Without a home, you're not part of the community anymore. You're an outsider, someone people avoid, someone invisible. Friends from before stopped calling. Old neighbors crossed the street when they saw me. To them, I was no longer Michael Harris the soldier. I was Michael Harris the failure. Hunger gnawed at me constantly. I learned where churches served soup, where dumpsters hid edible scraps, where kindness could be found if you swallowed your pride. But pride dies quickly on the streets. I stopped caring about dignity when my stomach burned empty. One evening, I sat outside a grocery store with a paper cup in my hands. People hurried past, eyes fixed straight ahead. Some dropped coins without looking at me, as if ashamed to acknowledge my existence. I wanted to shout, "I'm not just a beggar. I fought for this country. I bled for it. I lost everything for it." But the words stuck in my throat. Useless. The loneliness was worse than the hunger. At war, even in the darkest nights, I had my brothers beside me. We shared fear, laughter, pain. On the streets, there was only silence. Crowds rushed past, but none of them saw me. I could have vanished, and no one would have noticed. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I pulled out Emily's old letters and read them under the glow of streetlights. Words like, "Come back to me and I miss you every day" mocked me now. She had written those while already planning her escape. Or maybe she meant them at the time, but let the feelings fade. Either way, the result was the same. She was gone, and I was alone. There's a special kind of grief in losing everything at once. Wife, home, future. It's not like a slow unraveling where you have time to prepare. It's like standing on solid ground one moment and plummeting into a pit the next. No handholds, no rope, just falling endlessly. I tried reaching out to the Army for support. They offered pamphlets, helplines, polite words, but systems move slow and survival moves fast. I couldn't wait weeks for a caseworker to return my call. I needed food that day, shelter that night. So I adapted. Soldiers always adapt. I learned which alleys were safer, which benches went unnoticed by police, which corners brought in the most spare change. I wasn't living anymore. I was surviving. And yet, even in the depths of loss, I carried a spark inside me. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was memory. But some part of me still whispered that I had once been more than this, that I had worn a uniform with pride, that I had built a home with love, that I had been Michael Harris, husband, soldier, man. I lost everything, but I wasn't ready to lose myself. Not yet. Life on the streets strips a man of everything he once thought permanent. At first, I clung to routines, as if shaving in a public restroom or polishing my boots would somehow keep me tethered to the man I used to be. But the streets are relentless. They wear you down until even small habits crumble. And soon, I wasn't Sergeant Harris or even Michael Harris anymore. I was just another homeless man drifting through a city that didn't want to see me. The first weeks were the hardest. The nights cut cold, even in spring, and I learned quickly that concrete has a way of stealing warmth from your body. I rotated spots, park benches, bus stops, sometimes the back of an abandoned warehouse. If I stayed too long in one place, police or shop owners would tell me to move along. "No loitering," they'd say, as if I was loitering from my own life. Hunger gnawed at me constantly. I found soup kitchens run by churches, their volunteers smiling kindly as they handed out bowls of watery stew. I learned which dumpsters behind restaurants offered food still wrapped, not yet spoiled. The shame burned at first, but shame is a luxury the homeless can't afford. Survival swallows pride whole. I saw others like me, veterans mostly, men with hollow eyes, haunted by wars that America had long forgotten. We shared stories sometimes, around the back of shelters when there wasn't room inside. One man told me he'd lost his wife while he was stationed in Korea. Another admitted his kids hadn't spoken to him in years. Their voices carried the same hollow ache as mine. We were brothers of a different battlefield now, the war of survival. But the worst part wasn't hunger or cold, it was invisibility. I'd sit outside a grocery store, paper cup in hand, and watch people walk by. Most never met my eyes. Some crossed the street to avoid me. A few dropped coins without looking, their faces tight with guilt. Every day I wanted to shout, I fought for you, I bled for you, I had a home, a wife, a life, I mattered once, but the streets don't listen. They only swallow your voice. Loneliness crept in like frost. At war, even in chaos, I had my brothers beside me. We laughed, we cursed, we carried each other's burdens. On the streets, I was alone. Crowds bustled past, but no one saw me. Even Emily's memory, once warm, now felt like a knife. I read her old letters sometimes under the dim light of the street lamps. The words would come back to me, turning bitter in my mouth. She had moved on, sold the house, left me with nothing. Sometimes I'd walk past that house just to torture myself. The porch was freshly painted now, the windows glowing with the light of another family's laughter. I'd stand across the street, clutching my jacket, imagining myself on that porch again, Emily by my side. But the vision always shattered when the door opened and strangers stepped out. The city grew harsher as summer turned to fall. Nights grew longer, colder. I tried shelters, but they filled fast and fights broke out often. Men desperate for a bed, for a scrap of food. Once, I was shoved into a wall over a blanket. Another time, I woke to find my boots stolen. Out there, desperation turned men cruel, and I couldn't blame them. Hunger and cold make animals of us all. Yet through it all, I held on to fragments of myself. I still stood when the flag was raised outside City Hall. I still saluted, even if no one noticed. I still said yes, sir, when police barked at me to move, because discipline doesn't die easily. One evening, as I sat on a bench near the river, a little boy tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at me. "Why is that man sleeping there?" he asked. His mother pulled him away quickly. "Don't look," she whispered. But the boy kept staring, eyes wide with curiosity. In that moment, I wasn't invisible. Someone saw me, and though it was a child, it felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But moments like that were rare. Most days I faded further into the margins. My hands grew calloused, my beard thick, my clothes ragged. People didn't see a veteran, a husband, a man who had lost everything. They saw a problem to avoid, a reminder of how quickly life can unravel. The streets had taken my warmth, my pride, my visibility, but they hadn't taken my memory. I still carried Emily's face, our home, the laughter we once shared. It was both comfort and torment, a reminder of what I'd had and what I'd lost. And as I lay on that cold bench, staring at the night sky, I realized something. The war overseas hadn't destroyed me. Betrayal had. The streets hadn't made me homeless. Emily's choices had. And that truth cut deeper than any battlefield wound ever could. They call us veterans, but on the streets, that word loses its weight. Medals don't keep you warm at night. Ribbons don't fill an empty stomach. And the stories of bravery that once made people lean in with respect now only make them look away, ashamed or uncomfortable. Out here, I wasn't Sergeant Harris. I wasn't even Michael Harris. I was just another shadow on a sidewalk, an invisible veteran. It's a strange thing to go from hero to ghost. I remember walking through airports in uniform years ago, strangers shaking my hand, thanking me for my service. Children saluted me, their parents smiling proudly. I carried myself taller then, knowing that my sacrifices meant something. Now those same airports look different when I pass through just to stay warm. Security guards eyed me suspiciously. Travelers clutched their bags tighter. No one said thank you anymore. Being invisible isn't just about people not seeing you. It's about them choosing not to. I'd sit outside a coffee shop watching steam rise from cups I couldn't afford, and people would pass within inches of me, pretending I wasn't there. They'd look at their phones, at their shoes, at the horizon, anywhere but my face. It was easier for them to ignore me than to acknowledge what I represented: the fragility of security, the closeness of ruin. Some did notice, but not in kindness. A shopkeeper once shouted, "Move along, bum! You're scaring my customers." A teenager tossed a soda can at me, laughing when it bounced off my shoulder. A police officer told me I was lucky not to be arrested for vagrancy. Each word chipped away at me, reminding me that respect had a price and I could no longer pay it. But the hardest part was when I tried to remind people who I was. Once I told a woman who dropped coins in my cup, "Ma'am, I served in Iraq. I fought for this country." She paused, pity in her eyes, then whispered, "I'm sorry," before hurrying away. Not thank you, not recognition, just pity. That's when I realized, to the world, my past didn't matter. Only my present did. And my present was a man with nothing. I met others like me, brothers in arms turned invisible men. We gathered sometimes under the bridge, a ragtag platoon of the forgotten. We shared stories, cigarettes, scraps of food. One man named Ray had lost his leg to an IED. He tapped his crutch on the ground as he spoke, bitterly joking that Uncle Sam had replaced his limb with a disability check that never arrived on time. Another, Luis, showed me the folded flag from his son's funeral, the cloth frayed at the edges. He carried it everywhere, as if holding on to that piece of fabric kept him tethered to a life worth living. We weren't just homeless. We were reminders. Reminders that service doesn't guarantee salvation, that sacrifice can end in silence. Society didn't want to see us because seeing us meant admitting something ugly, that a soldier could give everything and still end up with nothing. At night, lying on the hard concrete, I thought about invisibility. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional. I'd lost Emily's eyes on me, the warmth of her hand reaching for mine, the simple acknowledgement that I mattered. She had looked past me long before strangers did. And maybe that's what hurt the most, being invisible to the one person who had once promised to see me forever. Sometimes, though, invisibility broke. A child would stare at me with wide eyes until their parent pulled them away. A kind soul would press a hot meal into my hands, asking nothing in return. Once a man in a suit stopped, crouched down and said, "I see you, brother." He pressed a 20 into my palm and walked away before I could even thank him. That single moment lit a fire in me, a reminder that I wasn't completely erased. Still, those moments were rare. Most days I drifted through the city unseen, a ghost of the man I had been. I tried sometimes to imagine what Emily would think if she saw me now. Would she recognize me? Would she feel shame, regret, or just indifference? The thought twisted my gut. I both longed for her to see me and dreaded it. Because if she looked through me like everyone else, if she too pretended I didn't exist, it would confirm what I feared most, that I had become nothing more than a memory, even to her. Invisibility weighs heavier than any pack I carried in war. On the battlefield, every man mattered. Out here, no one does. The city moves forward, fast and blind, while men like me fade quietly into alleys and shelters, our stories untold, our sacrifices forgotten. And yet, even as I sat there, with cold seeping into my bones, I whispered to myself, "I am still here. I am still Michael Harris." It felt foolish, like a man arguing with the wind. But it mattered, because even if the world refused to see me, I refused to erase myself. Invisible or not, I had a story, and one day someone would hear it. When you have lost everything, your home, your wife, your future, you're left standing in the ruins, wondering what still belongs to you. For a long time, I thought the answer was nothing. I was Michael Harris, the man who went to war, fought for his country, and came home to betrayal. I was the husband abandoned, the soldier forgotten, the veteran turned invisible. But as the seasons passed on the streets, as I watched years peel away like paint on old wood, I began to understand that loss doesn't erase you. It changes you. It carves you into something new, something raw, something painfully human. I think about the man I was before it all fell apart. Young, hopeful, proud of my uniform, proud of the house Emily and I painted together. That man believed in permanence, believed that vows were unbreakable, that homes were forever, that love could withstand any distance. I envy him sometimes because he lived with certainty, but certainty is fragile. Life showed me that with brutal clarity. So what remains of me now? Not the house, it belongs to another family. I see them sometimes when I pass by. Their laughter floats out through the windows, and though it twists in my chest, it also reminds me that homes are not just walls, but people. That house is no longer mine, but it is someone's. Not Emily's, she chose her path. And though I still feel the scar of her absence, I've accepted that her love was a season, not a lifetime. The pain of her betrayal once defined me, but now it lingers more like a shadow, always present, never as sharp as it was in those first days. Not wealth or possessions. Those slipped away faster than I ever imagined. I used to measure success in bank accounts, in the shine of my boots, in the strength of my handshake. Now I measure it in smaller ways. A warm meal, a safe place to rest, the simple act of waking up and facing another day. What remains of me is my story. I tell it sometimes to strangers willing to listen, to volunteers at shelters, to other veterans huddled around fires in the cold. I speak of the war, of nights spent staring at desert skies, of brothers I lost and brothers who saved me. I speak of Emily, of love that once felt unshakable, of betrayal that taught me how fragile the heart can be. I speak of coming home to nothing and finding myself among the discarded. And every time I speak, I feel a piece of my humanity return, because stories keep us alive, even when everything else is stripped away. I've learned that dignity isn't tied to walls or titles. It's tied to survival. Each day I endure is a victory, a refusal to vanish completely. I may be invisible to most, but I refuse to erase myself. I still stand when the flag is raised. I still remember the faces of the men I fought beside. I still carry Emily's laughter, even if it's laced with sorrow now. These things, they are mine, untouchable by betrayal or poverty. Sometimes children still ask their parents about me. Why is that man sitting there? And though the parents often hush them, I smile faintly, because in that moment, I am seen. I am not just a shadow. I am a man with a name, a past, a story. Michael Harris, soldier, husband, survivor. I don't know what tomorrow holds. Maybe another night on a bench, maybe a bed in a shelter, maybe a chance meeting with someone who still believes in helping the forgotten. But I do know this. I am still here. The war took my peace. Emily took my home. Life took my certainty, but what remains of me, the heart that beats stubbornly, the memories that refuse to fade, the story that demands to be told, that cannot be taken. So if you walk past me on the street, if you glance away and pretend I don't exist, remember this. I was more than the man you see hunched in the cold. I am more. I was Michael Harris, a soldier who gave everything. I am Michael Harris, a man who lost it all. And I remain Michael Harris because no one, not war, not betrayal, not time, can take away who I am. That is what remains of me.